Hello, I am Professor Kino and welcome to my Office of Cinematic Antiquity. Today we will be talking about... This film came out really under the radar. Maybe I just haven't been watching the right things of late, but I only ever saw one trailer for this film, and that was during Alita Battle Angel last month. And this, on top of the film not having any reviews until late the day before it came out, made it seem like the studio, Focus Features, was trying to ship this film out quickly and without making too many waves. In other words, they didn't seem too confident in the film's quality. But from the one trailer that I did see, I was personally intrigued, so I took the dive in rather blind with no expectations and have now emerged from the other side. Did I think the journey was worth it? Premise. 10 years after an extraterrestrial occupation of Earth, the aliens reform our global government into a fascist state. Amidst this, a rebel movement/terrorist cell located in Chicago makes it their mission to expose the weaknesses of their new overlords and incite a global insurgency against them. Writing. This is not your typical narrative. Instead of having a real protagonist, the film follows three stories. One is that of an insurgency executing its plan, one that involves a coordinated bombing strike on some government officials. Another is that of a detective hunting down the insurgency, and the third is that of a citizen trying to blend into the background of the new alien regime, but is finding it difficult because of personal connections that he has with characters from the other two stories. So for this review, I will break down each of the three stories, say what works and what doesn't, and then finish off by bringing up a few final overall aspects. And be warned, there will be some minor spoilers ahead. First, the insurgency storyline. In most films where there are rebels going up against oppressors, the rebels are colored as the heroes. Just look at Star Wars. However, Captive State does a great job at showing how heroic rebels can look exactly like terrorists when observed from a different angle. While we understand the reasoning behind the insurgency, the aliens are not the nicest of leaders, corruption, detainments, executions, over-surveillance, etc., the insurgents do things that are typical of the terrorists that we hear about in the news today. They are hidden in plain sight, they pick a packed stadium to bomb because they think it'll make the biggest impact, etc. And the storyline in Captive State works best when it blurs these lines between good and evil. However, while the insurgency plot does have some tense and effective scenes in addition to some creative ideas, it suffers a bit from a lack of real characters. All of the rebels minus one are just that, rebels. They have no character arcs and no memorable names. Watching them in action feels less personal and more observational. What is happening can be intriguing, but it's hard to feel invested because there is a lack of personal connection and therefore meaningful stakes. So this portion of the narrative has some neat ideas and plays with the good/evil conundrum of insurgencies, are those involved rebels or terrorists. However, the film's delivery of this theme is hindered by unengaging characters and a lack of any real stakes. The second storyline, that of Detective William Mulligan, focuses on being the counter to the insurgent plotline. With it, we get to see the inner workings of the fascist alien government. This whole segment reminded me a lot of Detective Finch in V for Vendetta. Both him and Mulligan give us eyes into what the rebels of the respective films are against. However, in addition to this, both characters also have their own side agenda that keeps their stories interesting. What are their ulterior motives? And that is when Mulligan's storyline is most intriguing, when we are forced to try and guess his true goal. My biggest complaint, however, would probably be that we know nothing about him besides his consistent attempts to uncover the insurgency. His character development is not as lacking as the insurgents is, he does get a little backstory near the end, but it's definitely not an emotional powerhouse. The mystery surrounding Mulligan is cool, but if you aren't really interested in it/it doesn't hook you, there isn't much more to it that gives it merit. However, if you do get intrigued by the whole thing, the film does reward you with a moderately satisfying reveal/conclusion. And the third story, that of Gabriel Drummond, is this film's attempt to add an emotional core. His brother is one of the insurgents, and Detective Mulligan happens to have been his dad's partner before the alien takeover. So Gabriel flits between the various stories of the film and pushes the narrative forward. However, he himself doesn't want to be involved with either side and just wants to escape. His character is as close as we have to a protagonist in Captive State. And his part of the film does do a solid job at showcasing how an everyday citizen lives under fascist rule, and with Gabriel's plotline in combination with the other two stories, we are given a nice trinity of fascist analysis, a dissection of fascist government, insurgents against a fascist state, and how its citizens are impacted and influenced by the two conflicting halves. Unfortunately though, besides the neat ideas that can be found at Gabriel's story's core, I never found him as a character all that captivating, and that, along with the fact that the film seemed to forget about him occasionally, made his entire section of the movie the least engaging of the three. It had its moments, but definitely not enough of them, and the fact that Gabriel is supposed to be the emotional soul of the film means that the film as a whole feels rather emotionless. So overall, the three stories had some unique and interesting ideas individually, especially with how they dissect fascist states, but it was not enough to bring the whole film together. Consequently, it ends up being engaging and thought-provoking while simultaneously feeling disjointed and sloppy. Acting. The acting is fine across the board. Most of the actors are faces that I've never seen before. Some are recognizable enough, such as Ashton Sanders from Moonlight as Gabriel Drummond, etc., but none of them steal the scenes that they're in. However, they do a good job at feeling visceral. They provide enough emotional oomph to keep the story going. As for the recognizable actors, however, there is John Goodman and Vera Farmiga. As for Goodman, he dons a grumpy, stoic face for the whole film as Detective William Mulligan. He did a good job at keeping me guessing what the character's true agenda was, but it wasn't Goodman's best work. And as for Farmiga, she was fine. She played the role she was given well, but was not particularly standout, besides the fact that she was Vera Farmiga. So overall solid, but nothing spectacular. Costumes, hair, and makeup. For the human characters, there were two looks. The policemen and government officials wore suits, and then there was everyone else. And as for the latter, they look like what you'd expect the inhabitants of a US fascist state to look like. They wore your usual styles of clothing that you see today, but old, worn, sad. It's actually really effective at helping to realize the world of captive state. And then, as for the look of the aliens, they were hit and miss. The basic ones are fine in my opinion. They looked a lot like the creatures from A Quiet Place, but not as creative. To be honest, take the shape of the monsters from A Quiet Place, make them hairy, and allow them to puff out their hair like pufferfish needles. To be honest, they looked fine, no more, no less. However, during one part of the film, some special aliens known as hunters are brought in, and they looked great. Creepy alien features combined with futuristic commando gear. They were really cool. Set design. The only real set is that of the futuristic dystopian Chicago in general, and it looks solid. Run down, dirty, slightly destroyed, it was reminiscent of the decimated small European cities in the post-World War II years. It wasn't super amazing, but it helped to make the alien fascist state more believable. Choreography. There are not many action scenes here. Besides a few chases, which were fine, there is only one actual fight that comes to mind. It involved one resistance member going toe-to-toe with an alien. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it was cool to see an alien in action. So the action was fine, nothing special. Cinematography. The cinematography felt very documentary-esque. Shaky, sometimes too much so, slightly amateur, but still pretty good. It felt a lot like the beginning of District 9, but not full-on documentary style. A lot of the film felt realistic, like a news channel snippet, and I thought it helped to portray the film's world very effectively. On top of this, there were some nice wide shots of Chicago and some really well done shots of the aliens that showed them off, but kept their full presence feeling tense and mysterious. So all in all, the cinematography was unique and in many ways helped to make the film more intriguing. Editing. This movie could sometimes get a little fast, with lots of characters continuously doing lots of things, but the editing did a solid job at keeping everything as concise and understandable as it could. It wasn't remarkable, but the edits did what they had to do and helped make Captive State moderately clear and smooth. CGI. The CGI was fine. There was one shot of an alien ship flying over Lake Michigan that looked kinda rough, but besides that, everything was alright. The aliens, the ships, the technology, the altered skyline shots, all passable. Music. The music of this film was very dark, dreary, and tense, from techno beats to eerie futuristic sounds to creepy string music to intense percussion rhythms and the occasional brass instrument blares. It sounded slightly familiar, but still felt unique and chaotic, and it continuously elevated everything on screen. It was one of the best parts of the film. Direction. Rupert Wyatt directed Captive State, and he definitely had some great ideas. The film's analysis of fascist states, along with the graying of lines between rebellion and terrorism, was really interesting and in many ways works. And on top of this, the world of Captive State is well realized, from the rundown buildings of Chicago, to the stylish but worn clothes of the people living within it, to the cool look of some of the aliens, to the way that the whole film is framed to feel documentary-esque, all really help bring the film together and make it feel realistic. However, because of the film's focus on social commentary first, it loses a little steam because of its lack of character development, emotional engagement, narrative clarity, and cross-story cohesion. This doesn't make it a bad film, just one that is targeted at a specific audience. Captive State is not amazing, but it definitely has its merits. My enjoyment. I found Captive State to be engrossing mentally. It was effectively tense when it needed to be, and definitely made me think, and I thought it was well done. However, it wasn't amazing. I thought Captive State had some cool ideas and some interesting political commentary, but just never made me emotionally invested in it at all. But I came out the other end pleased enough, and if given the chance, I would gladly sit through this film again. Recommendations. If you thought Captive State was a sci-fi alien invasion action film because of its trailers, be prepared to be disappointed. There isn't much action. It's definitely tense, but is focused a lot more on dissecting fascism, over-surveillance, and terrorism by using aliens than it is on telling a story. So if you think that sounds interesting, give this one a whirl. It reminds me a lot of District 9. Now, I don't think it's as good as that film, definitely not as tight narratively, but it's nice to see that Hollywood is still making more thought-provoking sci-fi once in a while. We got Annihilation last year, and now Captive State this year. So if you are a fan of films like District 9 and Annihilation, you might find some entertainment and food for thought here. It's not perfect, but it is definitely a fascinating ride. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like. If you want to add anything, feel free to comment. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I'm Professor Kino, and I look forward to our next discussion.